Hey guys, and welcome to one more episode of Builder Nation. For today's agenda, we have Dr. Robert Crockett, or I don't know if you like to be called Bob.
Bob is wonderful. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Co-founder of HaptX, a company building technology that simulates touch with unprecedented realism. So welcome, Bob. Super happy to have you here today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so why don't we start the interview by allowing yourself to maybe introduce to our audience, share a little bit about you, about your background, how you actually started on this path.
Again, my name is Bob Crockett. I'm a professor at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo in California, and I'm also co-founder of HaptX. And HaptX is a company that produces a pair of gloves for VR, but it's the only pair of gloves for VR that really have that true natural touch. So when you have the headset on, when you have our gloves on, you interact with a virtual object, it feels real. It's not symbolic haptics, it's not vibrations or buzzing. It actually, when you interact with a virtual coffee cup, your hand is stopped and you feel the exact same pattern that you would feel if you were interacting with a real object. So we're very excited about the technology. I've been with this company doing what we do for 10 years since we started in 2012.
Wow, really interesting. I do know that you're a professor and that you went to school for mechanical engineering, if I'm correct. So How was this transition like? I mean, you went to school for engineering and then you suddenly were like, okay, I'm going to start my company. Or how did you meet your co-founder?
Yeah, sure. So, I did my undergraduate in mechanical engineering. My PhD is in material science. And somewhere along the line, I also picked up an MBA. So I've always been interested in that intersection of technology and business. And specifically for me, what I find fascinating is taking technology that's just in the university labs or really early formation and trying to find the right fit for the market. Because so often you have wonderful, really interesting technologies that die on the vine because they just haven't made the right transition to a market that really wants them.
Okay, so you have been always like interested in the field, but why VR? Why will you say? Because back in the days, it was 2012, right? So 10 years ago, it wasn't the same as it is now.
Not at all.
How hard it was?
Yeah, so I knew nothing about virtual reality. This was a totally new world for me back then. I was introduced to this all by our co-founder, the real driving force of HaptX, Jake Rubin, and he cold called me as a 20-year-old college dropout. Essentially, he had taken one semester of biomedical engineering and then quit to start an earlier company of his. And so this was round two, and he explained to me this vision of a machine that you put your virtual reality headset on and strap into it, and you lose the distinction between the real world and the virtual world. And of course, this was all new to me, and it sounded a little bit wacky. It took me a while to really wrap my head around what was being proposed, but I did. I tried some of the early Oculus headsets, and that was the first time I had an experience with virtual reality. And you can tell it's pretty crude, at that time, and is still evolving, but you can see where it's headed. And if you can eventually get to the point where in your field of vision, it's as high a resolution needed to really not be able to tell whether it's a reality or a screen in front of you. At least in concept, you can do that with physical, pixelating your body and providing the right sensations across the body at the right resolution. There's no fundamental reason why you couldn't do an equivalent of virtual reality for the entire body. So what Jake was proposing was very audacious, but not impossible. And that's what really got me started down this path.
So you did see a future back then, in VR.
Yes, and Jake was paying me, so it was easy for me to take a chance, and it wasn't until I spent a little bit of time with Jake that I realized that no, there's something real here. This is a young man who spent far too much time doing background research and thinking about this problem, and has some ideas that really can go places. So my role is just to help him execute that vision.
And you had some knowledge in business. So how hard it was, or how was your first experience with investors?
Challenging, as you can imagine. If you can picture yourself as along with us on an early investor trip, it was this old guy who had no experience in virtual reality and a far too young guy who had no experience in business, trying to sell investors on a machine that sounds like it's well, Ready Player One had just been out, so it kind of looked like we cribbed our whole idea from the movies, which wasn't true, at all. We had this idea completely independently, but you can imagine it was a hard sell. And so I've mentioned this before, but it's really interesting. We were usually given about an hour to sell our case to early investors, and the first 50 minutes of that hour was convincing them that this could be done. And then, of course, we only had 10 minutes to convince them that we were the ones to do it. And that's usually where things were a little bit challenging. And it wasn't until we actually had hardware, early prototypes that we could let people interact with, that the conversation changed, and they believed that not only could it be done, but that we have the engineering chops to do it.
And how many years did it take you, or how many months in order to get the first investor?
Oh, so we started very slowly on the actual money side of it. We were self-funded enough to do some early proof of concept type prototypes that really demonstrated the technology, mostly to us. I mean, we had to convince ourselves that this was real. And that was very, very important in the early patenting phase, where we produced a pretty comprehensive patent of all these ideas that we had of how we would implement it, both today, back then, and with future technologies. So that was really important, but it truly wasn't what captured the early investment. We were very judicious in how we started developing prototypes that were specifically for investors, that could help explain our concept and generate the excitement and the real passion that goes along with knowing that you're onto something. So they were still very early stage, but the investors that took a chance on us could see the future.
And especially, I can imagine how challenging it might be to start like launching your first product or your first prototype, even if when you're in the development process, right? And especially talking about the technology back in the days. Yep. I know that you guys or your clubs provide like realistic feedback, if we can put it like that, realistic tactic feedback. Yep. So can you share a little bit more about why is this feedback important? So,
we started with this vision that was kind of abstract, but really focusing in on how we were going to bring this to market. Our philosophy was build the device that really is the best device that we can, that gives you the truest connection to virtual reality, that really feels real. And don't worry about the market or the price at this point. Let's see what we can build, see if we can build it, and see if there's a match between a customer that wants to pay for that quality of haptics. And we found out pretty soon that the answer is yes, is that there's a lot of companies who are customers now for our DK2. It's still, the last in line of development kits. It's not an inexpensive piece of hardware, but these are pretty big companies that know about virtual reality, have been involved in virtual reality for years and years and years, and also know the limitations of simulation and training in virtual reality. It's a wonderful tool for simulation and training for obvious reasons, that you can create any environment you want visually. But we're human. We touch things, we interact with things. And if you're missing that natural touch, you can have the most wonderful visual field in the world, but you're not going to learn the interior of a cockpit by pointing and clicking or mouse moves. It's training that really doesn't have the desired effect. So our match really was very early on with enterprise customers who are very sophisticated users of virtual reality, and who know what they need, and just have not had a product at any price point in the market up until now that meets that kind of bar of believability.
And you just mentioned training, and I was reading through the page, and I was like, wow, it looks like maybe it can work, or it can be like a perfect fit for the military market or for the healthcare vision. Why would you say it might be the best application for both cases? Any
sort of simulation or training that involves high value equipment or risky situations is a natural fit. So it's that combination of it's expensive to do it in the real world, but you have to do it to really train well. That's where we fit in quite well, because we can follow the same promises of virtual reality, that you can create any environment you want. But in a safe way, so you're not putting the trainees at risk for firefighters or other medical responders. And you can really get the training benefits that you'd get from an actual simulation, but at a fraction of the cost.
Really interesting, especially the training part. I think that's, I mean, being able to simulate or to feel the kind of situation, like if it was in real time, I think that's amazing, and especially for example, firefighters.
Yeah.
I was reading the article, and I know that it has something to do, of course, with heat. So how hard it was to develop this kind of technology when it comes to the hard touch.
Now you mentioned heat. Was that's an interesting discussion to have, because in our DK2 system we don't do any thermal simulation. It's all touch. So it's the solidity, the solidness of an object. It's the interaction between your hand and switches and knobs and things. There's no temperature in it. We have had temperature in our earlier prototypes. We had a very well-received prototype early on that was a big box that you put your hand up against, and you can put objects that are in virtual reality into the palm of your hand and feel not only the shape, the texture, but also the temperature. And that was a really amazing demonstration. But what we learned was that thermal transfer, the ability to detect heat, is not a must-have for our training environment. And thermal is a good example of how you have to be very judicious as a startup company that's developing hardware. Hardware is very expensive. When you actually get it out to market, if it's overly complex, it breaks, and that's not a good customer experience. And thermal transfer was a good example of something that we know we'll have in a future version of the gloves. We know how to do it. We've already demonstrated it. But for right now, we're pushing it off stream because it's not a necessary feature for our customers. So that's just kind of an interesting case study on any engineering group that is bringing a technology to market is absolutely listen to what your customers are telling you, because every single thing that you include as a feature has a cost, whether it's visible or hidden.
Or in the software part. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow,
yeah.
super interesting. I had no idea. Okay, so you're mentioning hardware, how expensive it is. Now, maybe we can talk a little bit about the software. Like the early beginning of the VR. I mean, it has been 10 years. So what would you say it has been the biggest technical challenge, if we can put it like that, in order to develop the prototype that you guys have now?
Yeah. Well, so back when Jake came to me, and he came from the world of software and video games, and so he understood the game engines. He understood what Unity and Unreal could do, and what was happening kind of beneath the hood with the physics engines that run them. And so he believed, and this turned out to be absolutely true, that if you tap into those game engines and extract the data that you need, the force vectors, the contact points, everything that's necessary, it's all there waiting for you to bring into your hardware system. And so it's not easy, but it's straightforward to use those game engine platforms as all the source of physics. We were very fortunate that the AAA game industry and all the software that goes along with it and all the development that goes along with it is absolutely compatible with driving hardware that interacts with that world. They had to do it for visual graphics, but you need the same sort of physics for our system. So that's a kind of a long answer to say that software is absolutely the key to making this hardware work. And we had a huge help by being at the right place, the right time in the development of video game engines.
And do you remember, this might be a personal question, but do you remember the feeling you had whenever you tried the first gloves?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you are part of the development of new hardware, you sort of never, well, I shouldn't say never, I never had that huge aha moment, because it's progressively better and better and better. We knew from the start what it could be, but we're thinking, a couple of years ahead and sort of making calculation adjustments about not what it feels like right now, but how much room you have for development and what sort of technologies would improve it and everything like that. What's been the most rewarding is when we go to a trade show and I see the reaction of others. So to answer your question, it's not my own personal aha moment about our technology. I'm kind of jaded by our own technology. But when you see somebody, literally laughing or crying or having a very emotional reaction to trying our hardware for the first time, then you realize what an impact it has and what you created. And that's super rewarding.
And especially, I mean, you're mentioning the aha moment, right? I don't know if you were there in the present moment, but how did you feel when the CEO and founder of Amazon like got to try your product?
Yeah, I actually wasn't there that time. I saw the video like many folks have, and it's always funny when a multi-billionaire controls a pair of robot arms, and that's something that looks a little bit frightening. But honestly, having Jeff Bezos try the system, and we've had a number of other very high-profile individuals try our system in more private settings. That's great. It's wonderful. It does wonders for our publicity. But honestly, I am more interested in people who are non-technical, who don't really know about VR, who try our gloves and can really get it. I think that's the litmus test about whether our hardware is performing the way we want to. Not when engineers or business leaders try it and think through very abstract ways of using it. But when somebody holds out their hand and a little tiny fox jumps in their hand and runs around and they fall in love with this little tiny animal, that right there is really the human side of what we're doing, and I consider that as important as any CEO.
And thinking about the future of haptics, like what developments are you most excited to see? I don't know, in 2 to 5 years or something.
There's so much activity behind the scenes, both at our company and of course at many other companies in the world of both the hardware that goes along with the visual side of VR and the software, and also the physical side of hardware, including haptics. And now the next phase really is making devices that people want, not as a novelty, but as a useful tool for business or something that is usable for entertainment. I think that the next 5 years are really going to see some major breakthroughs, not necessarily in the hardware, but in the accessibility and usefulness of the hardware.
And okay, so you guys have been around for 10 years now.
Yep.
And you passed the pandemic, right? We all passed that. What would you say? Did you have any like procurement challenge when it comes to the pandemic? I don't know, maybe supply chain.
Oh man, that's a problem for everyone. I will say that we are fortunate to have a very amazing manufacturing partner in AIS, Advanced Input Systems, and they have been around for 40 years. Supply chain is what they do. We as a small startup company would not have access to the sort of supply chain that they provided. So that really has been a match that has been wonderful, and they pulled us through during the pandemic, and we are very grateful for that.
So you were lucky. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Some companies have been through, if we can put it like that, through hell, and some companies they said that the pandemic was really helpful. So I think it depends. I mean, in your case, it was good news. So I'm glad. And last but not least, I wanted to ask you, like, do you have any advice for future entrepreneurs or engineers or people starting on this path?
Yeah, I think one of the pieces of advice that I would offer any young technical individual who has a technology-based idea is listen. Listen to those around you, because so many times engineers and entrepreneurs, and especially engineering entrepreneurs, get emotionally attached to their technology. They fall in love with a particular way of doing things, and that gives you a little bit of a narrow field of view. And the more that you have people who are willing to give you honest feedback, and this could be early customers, it could be mentors, it could be people who really dislike your technology, listen to what they're saying, and if a particular direction isn't panning out the way you thought, because nobody knows exactly how things are going to evolve as a technology matures. If you see it veering off course, be willing to discard it. That's something that HaptX has always been technology agnostic. We want to build the best system that we can, and if a newer, better technology comes along, we'll be the first in line to fold it in. So the bottom line is listen. Take advice from people around you, and make your own, synthesis and decisions about how to use that advice. But don't wait too long within your own world before you interact with others.
Thank you so much for sharing such a great piece of advice. Staying humble, yeah, I think that resumes it all. And okay, well, Bob, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Do you have any social media handles? Where can people find you? Where can people follow you?
Sure. Well, you could always contact us through the website, and that's www.haptx.com. And there is an opportunity to start engaging with us on that website. And we are at a number of shows. We'll be at AWE EU in October. Of course, there's always CES and South by Southwest and a number of events that we have our hardware at. And that's really the most interesting way to interact with us. This is a technology you really have to feel to believe. You really have to try. And I will just give a teaser that it will be possible for a much wider group of people to try our hardware in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much for sharing. Super excited to try it myself.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being here. And remember, guys, that you can also find more information, interesting articles, interesting interviews directly on our website, controlhub.com/builder-nation. We would love to hear from you. And once again, Bob, thank you so much for taking the time. Super interesting to see what HaptX is doing and what you guys will come up with on the next years and months.
Thank you. It's been fun. I appreciate you having me.